Hi everyone, my name is Lindsey Valdez. I'm the program director for MADD New Mexico, and welcome to our MADD Chatterbox series. If this is your first video that you're tuning into, we are doing interviews with different community partners, law enforcement, volunteers, sponsors, in all the work that they do here in New Mexico to help in drunk driving. And today we have Lieutenant Files to talk with us a little bit about the D.R.E program here in New Mexico. And I'll hand it over to you, Lieutenant, to talk a little bit on what that is and introduce yourself.
Sure. Okay. Well, thank you. Yeah, like you said, my name's Charlie Files. I'm a lieutenant here at the Los Lunas Police Department. I grew up in Albuquerque, so I started here in Los Lunas after a short stint in the Coast Guard in 2007. And ever since I started working here, impaired driving investigations is just something that I've been really interested in. So that took me to the D.R.E school in 2010, which took me to D.R.E instructor school in 2013, and I have been teaching the D.R.E program since. And in 2018, I became the state coordinator for the D.R.E program here in New Mexico. What the D.R.E program is, a D.R.E, it's a drug recognition expert. Some states would refer to it as a drug recognition evaluator. And it's an officer who is specially trained to identify people who are under the influence of substances other than, or even in addition to, alcohol. The officer goes through quite extensive training to obtain this certification, and they're called upon in impaired driving investigations in which, say, somebody is arrested for DWI and their breath alcohol content is not consistent with the impairment that the officer saw, which would lead the officer to believe that maybe there is something else on board, maybe something other than alcohol is going on here. So the program has a very rich history. It started in the 1970s in Southern California. And just real brief, what happened there was the LAPD officers were arresting people for drunk driving. That was their statute. And they're bringing them back, and they were blowing either zeros on the breath machine or something just not consistent, you know, below an 08, not consistent with the impairment that the officers were seeing. So this was frustrating them because at that time they didn't know what to do. Do they let them go? Do they, send them up to a hospital? Like, what's going on with them? So there were a couple officers that actually they knew that the individuals were under the influence of drugs, but they didn't have anything to substantiate that. So two LAPD sergeants got together and they reached out to medical professionals in their area. So doctors all played a role in formally developing the standardized process to determine not only that somebody is impaired by something other than drugs, but specifically what drug category they're under the influence of. That program took off from California. It's now in all 50 states. In New Mexico, we've been doing it since 1992. It's also international. It's in 5 different countries. So it caught the attention of the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration when the LAPD officers started with it. So they gained the support on that level, and it's just that's where we are present day.
That's really interesting. I didn't realize it was has been around so long, so many decades of kind of development. Does the program then, I'm assuming the way it was developed as opposed to now, I'm sure a lot of differences, right? The more information that we have now.
Sure. When the program was developed back then, it's still the same standardized and systematic process that we use today. There's a lot of things that haven't changed other than we're seeing new drugs get introduced every single day, right? So it would be impossible for any one person to say that this person is solely under the influence of, say, bath salts was a thing for a while, or kratom is something that we're seeing. That would be impossible because of the hundreds and thousands of drugs that are out there and the hundreds of drugs that get introduced every day. So we categorize it based on the signs and symptoms that the person is exhibiting. We'll categorize it into 1 of 7 drug categories.
I see. Okay, so what would you say is, why is it important to use drug recognition tools when enforcing, traffic and DWI laws here in New Mexico?
Well, drug impairment is so much different from alcohol. So much different. The way the drugs complexity on the human body is just beyond what we can even explain. There's so much science behind it. And that's for another Chatterbox series. But, police officers get very basic training in DWI and impaired driving investigations when they go through the police academy. They also get to practice their newly acquired skills of the standardized field sobriety test on people who are in a controlled environment, impaired on alcohol. We don't have that for drugs. And with drugs, there's many different things that somebody who may be impaired with drugs on the side of the road can say to an officer who might not have that level of training, that they might just kind of blow it off or accept that excuse, you know, like, I'm sorry, officer, I'm just really tired, you know, and maybe the officer knows that something isn't right with that person, and something's just not sitting well with them, but they don't smell the odor of alcohol. They don't have that slurred speech, the bloodshot, watery eyes, the basic things that the officer's trained on in the basic police academy. So they may just unknowingly and unintentionally let an impaired driver go based on some crazy excuse that the driver gives them. So the importance of recognizing it roadside is I mean, tenfold. No officer wants to mistakenly let an impaired driver drive down the road. Nobody wants that. So I think that's where the importance comes in. Our overall goal is to reduce the number of, you know, serious injury, crashes, fatalities, and impaired driving incidents. And recognizing the impaired driver, whether it's alcohol or drugs on the roadside, is the first step in doing so.
That makes a lot of sense. And what I think is so important too is, you know, it's not just drunk driving. And I think, you know, when people think of MADD or, you know, enforcement in general, it's really focused on alcohol. But really, you know, what we care about, and, you know, officers on the road as well, is what is a level of impairment, you know, regardless of if it's a prescription that is legal, that, you know, you were received, if it's some type of, you know, with marijuana, what that looks like is that it's still impairment. And that's, you know, what we're really focused on. You know, when it comes to drugged driving in New Mexico, and, you know, what that looks like in the future with, you know, potential recreational marijuana being legalized, or what that looks like, can you talk a little bit on, you know, what are the kind of challenges with enforcing drugged driving charges and laws, and prosecuting those cases here in New Mexico?
Yeah, absolutely, Lindsay. And I think you nailed it. I think we get away from the idea that we're looking for impairment in these cases. And by we, I'm talking about officers, prosecutors, sometimes judges. Like, maybe we forget that it's not any special number we're looking for, because we get caught up in that, you know, we think drunk driving and we think 08 right away. You're above the legal limit of a 0.08, then you're drunk, right? Or you're impaired. But with drugs, it's not like that. There's no magic number that you can associate with impairment with drugs. And so that's when we got to take a big step back and look at the big picture and remember that we're trying to prosecute an impaired driver. We have some limitations in law when it comes to even getting blood results back to see what level somebody's at. And that's okay. We don't need to rely so heavily on somebody's blood results. It's not like, if you look at, I'll use speeding for an example, right? If somebody's going 45 in a 30-mile-an-hour zone, they're speeding. It's, you know, that's very hard to argue. But it's not like that with drugs. If you have any particular level in your system, and it could go both ways. It could mean that you are, you know, not impaired because you have a tolerance to that drug. Maybe it's a prescription, whatever the case may be. But whereas somebody else who has never been prescribed or taken that same medication is at that same level as you, that may be impairing for that person. So that's one of the biggest challenges I think we have, is getting the word out to everybody that, you know, in DWI investigations, or DUI, or, you know, however you want to play it, we're looking for impairment, not any special number. So.
Right. And when it comes to the impairment, this is getting a little bit ahead. And, you know, I hope to bring in, you know, Kevin Bruno, you know, to talk a little bit about field sobriety tests. But in that event, you know, when we're really looking at what impairment of that driver is, does it really fall on the standardized field sobriety tests to determine that?
It falls on you know, on an enforcement level, it falls on the totality of the entire investigation. So everything that drew that officer's attention to the vehicle in the first place, whether or not it was somebody who maybe called 911 and said, hey, this person's not driving right, or I saw this person leaving and they just didn't look right when they got in the car, up to the point that the officer makes the decision that either, yes, I'm comfortable with this person driving down the road, I don't feel that they're a danger to themselves or others, or no, there's something not right with this person, I believe it to be impairment, and I'm going to make an arrest for impaired driving. The field sobriety test, and you know, when Kevin talks about this, he'll tell you the same. It's, I mean, it is a scientifically validated tool that we have to use, and it plays a big part, but the arrest or release decision is going to be made on the totality of the entire investigation.
I
And
see. And then, oh,
I'm sorry.
go ahead.
And that's very subjective sometimes too, and that's what's that's kind of another obstacle that we have, because that's a lot to put on a single officer, to say, you know, there's no black and white, you know, whereas as law enforcement we're kind of like trained black and white, right? We want to see something on paper. What can I do? What can I do? But we're not taking a breath sample on the side of the road to decide whether or not they're at 0.8 or above. That decision is made before we bring them back to get a sample to see what exactly their alcohol level's at. Or if it's drugs, you know, we might take a blood sample, but we've already decided that they were impaired on the roadside. So that's a lot for one officer.
Right, absolutely. So the D.R.E and kind of D.R.E training just really is like a supplemental tool to help in the totality of circumstances, you know, so you have more information on if this person was impaired or not.
Right. So the New Mexico D.R.E program has, we have two main trainings that we focus on. And one is a 2-day, it's called Advanced Roadside Impaired Driving Enforcement, or ARIDE for short. And that is open up to any law enforcement officer in New Mexico. In fact, my dream is that every single law enforcement officer that does traffic stops or is out in the field will get this training at some point in their career. And that's a very brief overview of things that you might see, hear, smell that, you know, aren't going to lead you down that path of alcohol impairment, but it could mean you want to look at possibly drug impairment a little deeper. Mm-hmm. It's not designed for anybody to come in and make a call on that, you know, this person's impaired on stimulant or something like that, but it's designed to kind of bridge that gap between the standardized field sobriety test and the drug recognition expert. So this class is for the officers to come in and just have an idea of, you know, these are my field sobriety tests and these are some other tests, and these are, you know, I'm going down the path of maybe drug impaired driving, and it's going to give them the tools that they need to, one, recognize it, and two, be able to articulate and document why they came to that conclusion. The other program that we have is the D.R.E school that I'm talking about, the drug recognition expert. And that's something that we hold once a year. We try to get, I mean, ideally every agency in New Mexico would have a D.R.E available to them. And that's kind of like a long-term goal for us. But we hold one school a year, and typically we get about 20 people certified as a drug recognition expert out on the streets. They typically come in after the arrest. So the ARIDE officer may have said, you know, I saw this, this, and this, and so I made the arrest. I brought him back. The breath alcohol was not consistent with what I saw in the field. The D.R.E is going to come in, do their eval. They might even be able to say, you know what, this is actually a medical condition, because drug impairment looks a lot like medical conditions sometimes, and get them the help they need. We've had some great success stories of that happening. Or they're going to say this person is, you're right, under the influence of, you know, this drug category and this drug category. And so that D.R.E.'s opinion, because we label them as an expert, is going to hold more weight than any blood result should.
Right, that makes a lot of sense. So, you know, you mentioned a couple of goals for the program, you know, and having, you know, all officers ARIDE certified and at least one, you know, D.R.E in each agency or each area. You know, are there any other goals that you see? I'm assuming that, you know, other state coordinators, like, are you in kind of contact with other states and what their programs look like? And do you have any other, you know, things that you'd like to implement here in New Mexico?
Yeah, absolutely. The state coordinators across the country, they're a pretty tight-knit group. I think there's a lot of communication between us. We're kind of overseen by the International Association of Chiefs of Police. So we have program managers, and we're divided into different regions across the country, and we meet, the regions meet once a year, and then all the state coordinators meet once a year. And the amount of information and ideas and things that come from those meetings is incredible. The communication is key in that. Ideally, you know, short term, we want to recognize the areas in New Mexico that are lacking the D.R.E resources, and we want to really focus on those areas and getting them D.R.Es and good qualified people. Identify those people that are going to succeed and excel in the training, and get them implemented and put out into those areas on the streets. We want to promote the importance of the program too. So not just to the public, but to law enforcement administrators and other police officers that are out there. there's this, there may be this mentality that, you know, taking a blood test, or if we get a blood test on somebody we're suspecting of drug impaired driving, you know, that's going to be sufficient. But I think, as I've kind of mentioned, and maybe a point I've already driven home, we're not looking for any magic number, and that's going to become a wall that we're going to have to get over to hold drug impaired drivers accountable, is that mentality that a blood test is sufficient. So we really need to get the DREs out there. We need to promote the importance and explain, you know, why their word and their opinion holds so much weight. And as we continue to do that, we're going to continue to branch out with the program. And again, I think we have, I'm ballparking, I think 150, 200 law enforcement agencies in the state of New Mexico. You know, my dream, every single one of those agencies has a DRE available to them. Mm-hmm. So we're getting there. It's going to take some time, but that's what we want to do.
Yeah, no, that it really makes a lot of sense. And, you know, the world that we continue to, you know, live in, and how that shapes. And, you know, we all want to be safe on the roadways, and we know that it's, you know, again, not just alcohol that's impairing drivers. So, you know, how do we really keep our roads safe? And absolutely having, you know, DREs available to help with that certainly is important. So with that, I just want to thank you so much for taking the time to chat. If anybody has any questions for Lieutenant Files, please comment down below. I'll be happy to, you know, circle back and get those answers. Just a huge thank you, you know, to you for all that you do here in New Mexico, and, you know, all the DREs out there. You know, it's a very difficult job. So thanks again.
Well, thank you, Lindsey. And we really appreciate the partnership we have with MADD and MADD New Mexico. So we're looking forward to doing some great things with this program and working with you guys, and ultimately making our roadways safer for everybody. So thank you very much.
Yeah.